A decision made behind the thick stone walls of the royal vault changed the atmosphere inside the palace in a single silent moment. Prince William stepped forward as a velvet case bearing the royal seal was placed before him, while officials quietly confirmed that access to one of Princess Diana's most treasured sapphire heirlooms would remain tightly restricted. No speeches were made, no cameras were invited. Only the sound of the vault doors echoed through the chamber as history, memory, and family loyalty collided once again. What began as a routine review of royal archives suddenly became the most emotionally charged moment inside the palace, raising one extraordinary question. Why had this forgotten sapphire crown become the one royal treasure everyone suddenly wanted to protect? The royal vault had protected generations of Britain's most treasured heirlooms for decades. Hidden beneath layers of stone, steel, and carefully guarded security, it held objects connected to coronations, state ceremonies, and the private lives of monarchs whose stories shaped modern history. Very few members of the royal family had ever entered its inner chambers, and even fewer had been granted permission to review items carrying both historical and deeply personal significance. On this particular morning, however, the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Palace staff spoke in lowered voices, while senior custodians prepared documents that had remained untouched for years. Prince William arrived without ceremony. There was no official announcement, no photographers waiting outside, and no public schedule describing the purpose of his visit. Those present understood that the review concerned far more than cataloging royal possessions. Every signature, every inventory record, and every sealed container represented a chapter of family history that demanded extraordinary care. Among those carefully preserved treasures rested a sapphire crown long associated with Princess Diana, remembered not simply for its remarkable craftsmanship, but for the emotional legacy many believed it carried. The vault custodian carefully placed a velvet case upon a polished table before breaking the official seal. As the lid slowly opened, brilliant sapphires reflected against the chamber's soft lighting, filling the quiet room with an almost reverent silence. No one reached toward the crown immediately. For several moments, William simply looked at it. Those standing nearby noticed that his attention remained fixed on the heirloom, not as a future king examining a valuable artifact, but as a son confronting another reminder of the woman whose memory continues to influence both his family and millions around the world. Palace officials proceeded through each stage of the review with meticulous precision. Historical records were checked against handwritten archive notes, conservation reports were verified, and protective custody documents were examined one by one. Every step reflected the royal household's long-standing responsibility to preserve historically significant objects with the utmost care. The discussion focused not on ownership, but on stewardship, ensuring that treasured heirlooms connected to the nation's history would remain properly safeguarded for future generations. Yet, even within such a formal process, the emotional weight inside the chamber was impossible to ignore. The sapphire crown represented far more than jewels arranged in precious metal. To many, it symbolized compassion, service, and the extraordinary public affection that surrounded Princess Diana throughout her life. William had spent years supporting charitable causes inspired by his mother's legacy, and those close to the family understood why objects associated with her continued to hold such profound personal meaning. Outside the vault, speculation quietly began circulating among palace staff. Routine archival reviews rarely attracted attention, yet whispers spread that this particular examination involved one of the most closely protected heirlooms connected with Diana's memory. No official explanation accompanied the increased security surrounding the review, and Buckingham Palace maintained its customary silence. That silence only deepened curiosity. Within royal circles, observers began wondering whether the careful reassessment signaled a broader effort to preserve historically important items linked to Diana for future generations, or whether another chapter of royal history was about to unfold behind closed doors. As the final archive register was prepared for signature, one senior official paused before turning to William with another sealed document that had not been mentioned at the beginning of the review. The atmosphere inside the vault changed instantly. Whatever was written on those pages appeared important enough to reshape everything that had happened only moments before. The unsigned document remained on the polished table for several long seconds before the senior custodian quietly slid it toward Prince William. Unlike the archive records already reviewed, this file carried an older royal seal and several handwritten annotations added over different decades. Its pages showed the careful marks of generations of palace archivists who had understood that certain royal possessions carried importance far beyond their financial value. The sapphire crown was listed not merely as an heirloom, but as an item requiring extraordinary family consultation before any future exhibition, ceremonial use, or historical reinterpretation could ever be considered. William studied each page in complete silence. The words before him described years of preservation, conservation, and restricted handling. But one passage immediately caught his attention. It emphasized that objects connected to Princess Diana's personal legacy should always be protected with exceptional sensitivity because of their unique place in both family history and public memory. The recommendation had never attracted public attention, yet within palace records it remained carefully preserved as guidance for future custodians responsible for safeguarding historically significant items. The vault staff waited respectfully while William continued reading. No one attempted to interrupt him. Even those who had spent decades working inside the royal archives understood that moments like this could never be rushed. Every signature carried legal importance, but every decision also carried emotional consequences extending far beyond official paperwork. The sapphire crown represented a remarkable chapter of royal history, yet it also reminded everyone present that history and family memory were often impossible to separate. Meanwhile, elsewhere inside the palace, preparations continued for an entirely different archival review involving several historic collections scheduled for future conservation. Palace administrators quietly compared inventory records while discussing long-term preservation projects designed to protect royal artifacts for generations still to come. Among those routine conversations, questions naturally emerged regarding several items connected with Princess Diana. The discussions remained administrative, yet curiosity slowly spread through the household as staff realized that William's private review inside the vault had taken considerably longer than expected. Royal historians have often explained that preserving important heirlooms involves much more than securing valuable objects behind locked doors. Every artifact must be documented, carefully maintained, periodically examined, and protected against deterioration. In many cases, curators also consider the historical context surrounding each piece, ensuring that future generations understand not only what an object is, but why it continues to matter. The sapphire crown belonged to that rare category of treasures whose significance extended well beyond craftsmanship alone. As William reached the final pages, another carefully preserved envelope appeared inside the archival folder. Unlike the official inventory sheets, this document had been sealed separately and carried instructions limiting access to only a small number of senior custodians. The aging paper suggested it had remained unopened for many years. After receiving confirmation from the chief archivist, William carefully broke the seal. Inside rested a handwritten memorandum prepared decades earlier during an internal review of several royal heirlooms connected with Princess Diana. Rather than discussing monetary value, the memorandum focused entirely on historical stewardship, emphasizing that future custodians should always preserve the emotional integrity of objects closely associated with her life and charitable work. It recommended that any future decisions involving those items should prioritize respect for historical context above changing public opinion or ceremonial convenience. The words seemed simple, yet they carried remarkable weight. William slowly lowered the paper before looking once more toward the sapphire crown resting inside its velvet case. Those standing nearby noticed the atmosphere inside the chamber become even quieter than before. Nobody spoke because no explanation seemed necessary. Sometimes history expressed itself more powerfully through silence than through speeches. Outside the secure vault, rumors continued spreading among palace employees who had noticed unusual security measures surrounding the review. Some believed a routine conservation project had uncovered forgotten historical records. Others quietly wondered whether preparations were underway for a future exhibition celebrating Princess Diana's humanitarian legacy. Buckingham Palace offered no public comment, allowing speculation to grow without confirmation. That familiar silence only encouraged further curiosity, especially among longtime royal observers accustomed to reading significance into even the smallest administrative decisions. As the chief custodian prepared the final registry for completion, another official entered the chamber carrying a fresh communication from the Palace Archives Department. After reading only the opening lines, the custodian's composed expression noticeably changed. He immediately looked toward Prince William before quietly placing the newly arrived document beside the original file. For the first time that morning, even the experienced archivist exchanged uncertain glances. The newly delivered archive document remained unopened, as the chief custodian quietly dismissed everyone whose presence was no longer required. Within moments, the large chamber felt even more secluded than before. Only a handful of senior archivists, the conservation officer, and Prince William remained beside the polished table where the sapphire crown continued to rest beneath its protective glass. Every movement became slower, every word more deliberate, as though those present understood they had crossed beyond an ordinary inventory review into something carrying far greater historical importance. The chief archivist finally unfolded the document and explained that it had surfaced during a broader examination of palace conservation records stored separately from the main collection. Decades earlier, several private recommendations had been placed under restricted classification to ensure future custodians understood the historical significance attached to certain heirlooms connected with Princess Diana. These recommendations were never intended to attract public attention. Instead, they served as guidance for preserving historical integrity whenever future generations reviewed items associated with one of the most recognizable figures in modern royal history. William listened carefully without interrupting. His attention remained fixed on the archival notes, while the conservators described the extensive responsibility involved in protecting artifacts whose importance extended far beyond their craftsmanship. Every restoration, every environmental inspection, and every transfer between secure locations required detailed documentation so future historians could understand exactly how each object had been preserved. The sapphire crown had followed that process with extraordinary consistency, reflecting decades of careful stewardship rather than public display. The discussion gradually shifted from conservation to legacy. Senior historians explained that some royal heirlooms naturally become woven into the nation's collective memory because of the individuals associated with them. In such cases, preserving the historical story surrounding an object becomes just as important as preserving the object itself. That principle had guided generations of royal archivists, ensuring that personal significance was never overshadowed by ceremonial value alone. William slowly approached the display once more. The sapphires reflected softly beneath the controlled lighting, unchanged despite the passing years. For a brief moment, the room fell completely silent. Those present understood they were witnessing something deeply personal, not because of royal protocol, but because certain memories remain powerful regardless of time. The crown represented craftsmanship, history, and continuity, yet it also reminded everyone that Princess Diana's legacy had always been measured less by royal tradition than by the compassion she inspired in people across the world. Outside the secure archive wing, preparations quietly continued for several future heritage exhibitions planned by palace curators. Historians discussed how important royal artifacts could help educate future generations about Britain's constitutional history, charitable traditions, and evolving monarchy. During those conversations, questions naturally arose about whether certain items connected with Princess Diana might one day appear as part of carefully curated educational exhibitions. Officials emphasized that no decisions had been finalized and that any future display would require extensive consultation, conservation approval, and historical review. As afternoon approached, Buckingham Palace remained characteristically silent. No official statement confirmed the ongoing archival review, yet the absence of public information encouraged growing interest among royal commentators. Without verified details, speculation spread rapidly across newspapers and television discussions, with many observers wondering whether the palace was quietly preparing a broader initiative to preserve and eventually showcase important aspects of Diana's humanitarian legacy for future generations. Inside the vault, however, attention returned to one final matter. The conservation director carefully removed another protective folder from a secure cabinet positioned along the far wall. Unlike the earlier inventory files, this folder contained long-term preservation recommendations extending many years into the future. As William reviewed the documents, one proposal immediately stood out. It suggested establishing an expanded heritage program dedicated to safeguarding historically significant items associated with Princess Diana while ensuring they remained protected under the highest conservation standards. No immediate decisions were made. The proposal represented only an archival recommendation requiring further review, yet its existence demonstrated how seriously palace historians regarded the responsibility of preserving objects connected with one of the most influential members of the modern royal family. William quietly closed the folder before looking once more toward the sapphire crown, understanding that preservation was never simply about protecting precious materials. It was about protecting the stories future generations would inherit. Just as the meeting appeared ready to conclude, a senior palace aide entered the chamber carrying an urgent communication from Buckingham Palace itself. The message was brief, yet after reading it, the chief custodian looked toward William with unmistakable seriousness. Without saying another word, he gently closed the sapphire case. The sapphire case remained closed as the chief custodian carefully placed both hands upon the polished table. No one hurried toward the exit. The message delivered from Buckingham Palace had not interrupted the review because of an emergency. It had interrupted it because the palace wanted every remaining decision to follow the highest historical and archival standards. For everyone inside the vault, the responsibility had become larger than a single heirloom. They were now protecting a piece of history that had continued to inspire generations long after Princess Diana's lifetime. Prince William accepted the communication without speaking. He slowly unfolded the document and read each paragraph with the same patience he had shown throughout the day's review. The letter referred to an expanded heritage consultation involving senior archivists, conservation specialists, and representatives responsible for preserving historically significant royal collections. Rather than recommending immediate public display or ceremonial use, the proposal focused on strengthening long-term preservation so future generations could understand the historical importance of Diana's charitable legacy through carefully documented artifacts. The recommendation reflected a principle that had guided the royal collection for decades. Historic objects were never preserved simply because they were beautiful. They were preserved because they represented moments, people, and values that helped explain the story of the monarchy itself. Some heirlooms marked victories, others commemorated national milestones, while a small number carried deeply personal significance that could never be measured in gold, diamonds, or sapphires. The crown resting inside the velvet case clearly belonged to that final category. William carefully closed the document before looking once more toward the sapphire crown. Those present noticed that his expression had changed. Earlier, he had entered the vault as a son reviewing an important reminder of his mother's life. Now he appeared equally aware of another responsibility, the duty to ensure that future generations would understand why Princess Diana continued to occupy such a unique place in modern royal history. Preserving the object alone would never be enough. Its story also deserved careful protection. The chief archivist then presented the final conservation register for review. Every inspection completed during the day had been documented in precise detail. Environmental reports confirmed the crown remained in exceptional condition. Conservation experts recommended continued preservation under controlled conditions, while historians emphasized that any future educational exhibition should carefully present the broader historical context surrounding Princess Diana's humanitarian work rather than focusing only on royal symbolism. Their shared objective was clear: protect both the artifact and the legacy attached to it. As preparations concluded, palace staff quietly secured every archive record before returning them to restricted storage. The sapphire crown was gently placed inside a specially designed conservation case built to protect delicate historic materials from light, humidity, and environmental change. The careful process reflected decades of museum-quality preservation techniques developed specifically for irreplaceable royal heirlooms. Nothing about the procedure felt rushed. Every action demonstrated respect for history. Outside Buckingham Palace, reporters continued waiting behind security barriers, hoping an official announcement might finally explain the unusual activity taking place behind palace walls. Camera crews remained in position while royal commentators discussed the enduring public fascination with Princess Diana's legacy. Yet the palace released no dramatic statement. Its silence remained consistent with the long-standing practice of allowing private archival work to remain confidential unless formal announcements became necessary. Ironically, that restraint only deepened public curiosity. As evening approached, William prepared to leave the vault. Before the heavy doors closed, he paused for one final glance toward the conservation chamber, where the sapphire crown would continue resting under expert protection. For a brief moment, the room became completely silent again. The day's work had not changed history. It had simply ensured that an important chapter of it would remain carefully preserved for those who would one day inherit the responsibility of remembering it. The massive vault doors slowly closed, their echoes fading through the stone corridors exactly as they had for generations. Inside remained one remarkable sapphire crown, protected not only for its extraordinary craftsmanship, but for the enduring values it had come to symbolize: kindness, compassion, dignity, and service. Outside, questions continued to circulate among royal observers, historians, and admirers of Princess Diana, many wondering what future generations might eventually learn about the treasures quietly safeguarded within the royal archives. Whether the sapphire crown is ever included in a carefully curated historical exhibition or continues to remain protected within the royal collection, one truth remains unchanged. Princess Diana's legacy has never been defined by jewels alone. It lives on through the lives she touched, the charities she inspired, and the compassion that continues to shape the work of those who honor her memory today. Sometimes the most valuable treasures inside a royal vault are not the objects themselves, but the stories they preserve. And those stories, carefully protected through each generation, may ultimately become the greatest inheritance of all.